Welcome, everybody, to the Juice for a Secular Democracy webinar, Defending Democracy, State Legislators on Combating White Christian Nationalism and State Policy. We're really excited to have you all here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Juice for Secular Democracy, we are an organization that is galvanizing the Jewish community to advocate for separation of religion and government, for separation of church and state, for the benefit of people of all faiths and none. We believe that separation of church and state protects religious freedom for everyone. And today, despite everything that's happened, and I'm sure a lot of you following national politics, we know that a lot of the day-to-day policies that impact our lives come from state and local policies. And so we're really excited to have two state lawmakers with us today to talk about their day-to-day work and how they're seeing the white Christian nationalist movement impact their states and how they're fighting back. So today we have Louisiana State Representative Mandie Landry, who represents Louisiana's 91st District. She is on the Insurance Committee, the Judiciary Committee, Ways and Means, and the Joint Legislative Committee on Capital Outlay. And we also have Pennsylvania State Representative Dan Frankel, who serves Pennsylvania's 23rd District. He chairs the Health Committee and is also on the Policy Committee and Rules Committee in Pennsylvania. So really excited to have you both here and to hear about your experiences. I want to start with asking you, Representative Landry, about how white Christian nationalism is showing up in Louisiana in terms of policy, and just tell us about your day-to-day work in the Louisiana legislature.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm State Representative Mandie Landry, New Orleans. I was just reelected to my second four-year term last fall, and we have term limits of 3 4-year terms. I am a longtime lawyer. Sorry, I'm a little casual working at home today. I am a longtime lawyer and got into politics in part because of reproductive rights. I represented an abortion clinic and an IVF clinic as an attorney, and some minors seeking judicial bypass. And so we just talked about the governor of my state at the time for the past up until this year was a Democrat, John Bel Edwards, and he was a staunchly, violently anti-choice Democrat. And part of the reason I decided to run was because we were so furious that there was even some of our own people doing this to women. And that's kind of a good segue into this call. And for those of us in the Deep South, I mean, this is my life, is people in committee and on the floor and their bills. There's no dancing around. They are doing this because of their religion, because of their beliefs, because of Jesus, because of whatever. It's constant. And I'm a lifelong Catholic, and that's been pretty surprising to see. But that's been what I've experienced. Alec has strong control of Louisiana along with the rest of the South. For those who don't know, you'll have to Google it, Alec, but it's basically those nationwide organizations funded by the Koch brothers and others who sprinkle model litigation like the 10 Commandments bill, which passed out of my state, like a lot of other church and state issues, like a lot of anti-gay measures, like a lot of reproductive rights measures. These organizations spread them throughout the country, especially in the South, and they're always combined with religion. And so I've seen it just go from bad to worse to unbelievable. The fact that this year my state was on national news for passing a law that said you have to post the 10 Commandments in every classroom in the state. And when I tell you that's not even in my top 20 worst bills of this year, if someone had asked me, I think we're facing something a little very different than a lot of the Midwestern or most of the Midwestern and coastal states. But it's even difficult for people like me who grew up here, who see this and don't really know what to do about it. So I have an interesting perspective and happy to answer questions. And I feel like often when I talk about my political life here to people from the rest of the country, that Louisiana is often a canary for a lot of these issues. We see it first. We saw the anti-abortion craziness first. We're seeing climate change first. So if what we're dealing with can help anyone sort of slow walk some of what we see happening, maybe it'll be worth it to help y'all out. So that's my little intro. And I will be going to the convention if anyone on here is going.
Great. And before I turn to Representative Frankel, just two quick follow-up questions. One is when people are explicitly invoking their religion and their faith when they introduce these anti-abortion bills, do you or other legislators talk about either their Christian faith and their perspective as a Christian who's pro-choice, or are there minority faiths or Jewish legislators or anyone who speaks to the fact that these religious views don't actually represent everyone? And I'll start with that question.
Yeah. So I think everyone, we have a lot of Catholics in Louisiana who are very different culturally from the rest. Are various Baptists, Southern Baptists. I also don't know much about the different types of Baptists, having grown up Catholic. We've had, I think, one Jewish member in the past. Some of us, like myself, there aren't many pro-choice, but there are some of us will say, and I've had to go down the well many times. I said, look, I grew up Catholic with the rest of you, and what I know is the same percentage of women, in the regular women who are non-Catholic women who have an abortion, the same percentage of Catholic women have an abortion. If 99% of women use birth control, 99% of Catholic women use birth control. I tell them how 1 out of 4 women in the room and 1 out of 4 women in their lives has had an abortion. And I tell them that to let them know that they can't hide behind a religion where other people aren't abiding by the same rules. There aren't many of us who bring it up in defense, but we point out to them that you're saying that if this is a religious issue, but it's really not, and it really wasn't until recent years. And it's just often the religious angle is not a battle I want to fight, but focus more on rape and incest and health of the mother, which has been a big one. And we still aren't making a lot of headway on that, but we really very much have a homogeneous legislature for the most part.
Thank you for that. And Representative Frankel, can you also similarly explain how white Christian nationalism is showing up in the Pennsylvania legislature in terms of policy and just your day-to-day work in the legislature?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we have. I've been in the minority for so many years, and then we're finally in the majority. So, to give you a sense of the types of issues that we've had to deal with, I currently serve as the majority chairman of the Health Committee, and I spent 4 years as the ranking member. So in that period of time, with Republican members of my committee who almost always expressed their positions in the context of their own faith. We passed abortion ban after abortion ban. We passed attacks on the LGBTQ community, specifically transgender children. We attacked the University of Pittsburgh, and I represent the city of Pittsburgh, and I'm a trustee of the University of Pittsburgh for doing field tissue research. We passed legislation, anti-masking acts, anti-vaccine bills, and much of it was framed within, both a conservative context, but also informed by many of my colleagues' very deep religious convictions.
Thank you for that. So as a pluralistic Jewish initiative, I mentioned earlier, Jews for Secular Democracy is advocating for separation of church and state. So I'm wondering if, first you represent Landry, if you could both tell us about your work with the Jewish community, with other religious minority communities, and maybe Christians also in your district to address some of the issues that you brought up that are coming from a kind of extremist, narrow, white Christian nationalist lens. Like, how do you work with those engaged partners in the community?
So up until this year, I would say most of my interaction with interfaith communities was through reproductive rights issues, occasionally some criminal reform issues, because there are quite a few different faith ministers who do work closely with some of the, I'm sorry, I just saw it cut out. There are some faith ministers of various backgrounds who work with a lot of the criminal reform and survivor networks. But this year we had a bill to basically to re-implement the death penalty, because you know that they, can anyone see the reps? Am I frozen? I'm sorry, did I freeze?
No, you sound good and we can see you.
Okay,
We're
I saw a
picking up
text right
some
there.
No, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. We had a bill this year that passed that basically would reinvigorate the death penalty. There's been, as I'm sure y'all have seen nationwide for at least a decade, if not longer, that it's been difficult for states with the death penalty to actually obtain the chemicals, the medications to kill people, to execute people. And so there was this bill about basically allowing the state to make the products in state. I'm still not entirely sure what it was, but they also included a provision to bring back the gas chamber. And so I have a lot of advocate friends who are Jewish and lawyer friends. And so there was a quick group put together of faith leaders from the Jewish community, and then lawyers and lobbyists. I think they called it Jews Against Gassing, to work against that part of the bill, to try to amend it and to file another bill during session to at least remove that from the law. And it did make it through the Senate and then was smushed on the House side. But it was actually very heartening to see that group pull itself together very quickly, and then also get support from all of our left-leaning other advocacy groups who've worked with a lot of those people in the past. So this year was the first year that I have seen a larger presence of the Jewish community in Baton Rouge.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Representative Frankel?
So I've been doing this for 26 years. I'm running for my 14th term, and I represent the Jewish community in the city of Pittsburgh, the heart of the Jewish community. Squirrel Hill is the heart of my district, and as you may recall, it is also the site of the horrific anti-Semitic shooting at the Tree of Life synagogues 5.5 years ago, just a few blocks from my home, where 11 of our friends and neighbors were murdered. My background, moving into running for office, really came through the organized Jewish community in Pittsburgh. I had served in a number of different roles, a number of different boards. I chaired the board of the Jewish Family and Community Services, a social service agency that's part of our Jewish community organizations. I chaired the Pennsylvania Jewish Coalition, statewide group that worked with other faith-based groups to advocate really for our human service agencies that provide a great deal of service to vulnerable communities around the state. And I also served as the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council, which worked with other groups outside of the Jewish community on issues of common concern, primarily social justice issues. So that kind of was my platform running for office. And since coming into office, I've worked very closely with my district, my Jewish community, and other communities here to advocate for a social justice agenda that I was working for when I was in those capacities as a volunteer in my community. So, reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, access to healthcare, and today voting rights becoming very, very critical to it, and we're trying to create those alliances with others. I also, within the legislature, chair the Pennsylvania Jewish Legislative Caucus, which we just formed in the last 2 years, really in the face of this rising anti-Semitism that we've seen around the country, not just obviously Tree of Life, but when you take a look at Pennsylvania, the number of white nationalists, white supremacist groups, where I think, in the top, in the country, the number of incidents of particularly anti-Semitism, let alone racism and anti-LGBT stuff that takes place here. But anti-Semitism is off the charts in Pennsylvania, and it's off the charts in this country. So we felt it was very important to bring not only Jewish legislators, but others who had concerns, represented Jewish communities across the country who wanted to identify with us. So it's not just Jewish members of the legislature. It's really it's folks from all faiths and all backgrounds that are part of this. And we've prioritized one of the things that we did this year that I've been working on since I came in the door was to update Pennsylvania's hate crime statutes, which were very narrow, only provided protections to people on the basis of age, gender, religion, did not have national origin, did not include sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, did not include the disability community. And we've been trying to update it since, and in the face of the rising incidents of anti-Semitism, and particularly that I think are kind of like headlining all the other acts of hatred that we see around our communities. We wanted to give our communities across Pennsylvania additional tools to be able to combat hatred and bigotry. So we wanted to not only expand the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act to provide those protections for those other vulnerable groups, but also wanted to provide training for law enforcement, because law enforcement, even though we know we have a sharply increasing rise in incidents in the state of Pennsylvania of acts of hatred based on these characteristics, we know that law enforcement doesn't necessarily understand how to identify them or prosecute them. In addition to that, we know that our college campuses, and this is before what's taken place after October 7th, but our college campuses have been areas where folks have been targeted by hate groups, both for recruitment and as victims. And we wanted to provide a mechanism for college administrations to have a reporting system of those acts of harassment and assault and intimidation that was anonymous, that mirrored what a piece of legislation I had introduced and was passed into law several years ago after the Me Too movement started around sexual harassment and assault on campuses as well. So it would mirror that. And in addition, we wanted to provide a mechanism for rehabilitation of folks who'd been convicted of these crimes, to do opportunities to be educated, particularly in the areas of the groups that they had been targeted, and community service post serving their sentencing. So that's a piece of legislation. Those are 4 bills that moved out of the Pennsylvania House on a somewhat bipartisan basis. I would not say, a robust bipartisan vote, but unanimous Democrats and about a dozen Republicans. Just to give you context, we have 203 members of the Pennsylvania House. Those bills have moved into the Senate, where we have had which is a Republican majority, we've had a very hard time getting them moved there. I've been working very hard with trying on a bipartisan basis to get things done. One of the objections we get to this is that my Republican colleagues believe, well, these are already crimes. They don't get the idea that a hate crime is something that goes beyond the victim itself. So, for instance, you paint graffiti on a stop sign, that may be a crime, but if you paint a swastika on a mosque or a synagogue or a church, that act of vandalism is meant to go much further and to intimidate an entire group of vulnerable people. So we're trying to make that distinction with my colleagues so they understand why this is important and why we want to move forward with this. Our governor, Josh Shapiro, who I served with, he's 20 years ago, Governor Shapiro was my colleague in the State House, and he and I worked together on that bill way back then. So these are things, and the other things we've been working on that kind of line up with this. So we're one of the few states in the Northeast quadrant, actually the only state in the Northeast quadrant that does not provide civil rights protections for the LGBTQ+ community. And we've been trying to get that done for years by amending the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act to extend protections on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So we have a pretty robust agenda. We have support from our governor. We have unanimous support within the Democratic caucus trying to build that bipartisan support for I think these really important social justice issues has been a real challenge.
And just to clarify, when you say that Pennsylvania doesn't have civil rights protections for the LGBTQ community, do you mean, for example, that as of now, you can be discriminated on the basis of housing?
Right. So it's the existing statute, the Human Relations Act, provides protections in employment and housing, public accommodations, and education. So you can, even though we have the Supreme Court made a decision on employment, it doesn't cover all employers because smaller employers are exempted from it, and it doesn't incorporate protections in housing, education, and public accommodations. And public accommodations has become kind of the Achilles heel, I'd say, of the legislation, because people have been targeting, the transgender community as an excuse for being opposed to this, because of the whole bathroom issue that we saw play out in Texas and in North Carolina, and it's become a talking point that has made it difficult to get this passed. And we had we've had resources poured into the state to get this done over the years. I think we're reinvigorated, and we actually passed that legislation as well as my hate crimes legislation and sent it over to the Senate, where it's still sitting and not being able to get done.
Thank you. And before we move on to the next question, I did want to kind of circle back on white Christian nationalism a little bit. So you both talked about working with the Jewish community and interfaith communities around issues of like the death penalty, anti-Semitism, social justice issues. Is there a conversation around specifically white Christian nationalism and the use of Representative Landry, you were talking about people very explicitly using Jesus and their Christian faith to justify why they're introducing these anti-abortion bills. I know, I don't remember when it was, but I know in the Pennsylvania legislature, I think it was a few years ago, you had a Christian nationalist interrupt the signing in or the swearing in of a Muslim legislator, and
she was actually giving the prayer, the opening prayer,
right, because it was an
and attacked the
invitation.
Muslim community. She's maybe the most extreme member, but there are plenty that mirror her sentiments, but may not be as kind of vocal about it.
Right. Yeah, they don't say the quiet part as loudly as she does. So I guess I just want to hear a little bit more from both of you on what is the conversation? Is there a conversation around Christian nationalism in particular, around not just the Jewish community, but interfaith relationships that you have that outside of anti-Semitism, outside of kind of the social justice issues, voting, all those issues of the day? Is there kind of a recognition that this is a movement that needs an interfaith response?
Again, I'm down in a very different world down here. Religion is used by most people very positively there. I would cause problems for myself, frankly, if I addressed it other than I am also Catholic and think this. I would say that, but on the other hand, it's as much cultural and social. I mean, I still call myself Catholic. I haven't gone to church since I was young for political reasons. But it's a lot more social and cultural here. I have not seen the sort of thing you described, because it is very roughly homogeneous. What we have seen, and one of my friends called in, reminded me of every year, and sometimes multiple times, especially this year, of some of my very far right colleagues, and y'all know who I'm talking about, the very, very far right that is very pro-Israel, which I did not understand until a couple of years ago, because I thought it was very strange that Louisiana legislators were filing resolutions on behalf of Israel. And then I was explained to me what was going on. So I've seen that. I have not really seen efforts to identify religion as part of how we govern because it is so intrinsic in at least the public persona of a lot of politicians. I'll say that I do not believe most of these people are as religious as they claim to be, but it is something that is difficult to contradict them on. And when the governor, when he signed the bill on the 10 Commandments, he said something like, "Come sue me." I mean, to me, that shows it's not about the 10 Commandments or religion. It is literally just about the politics of it, because it's hard to tell someone what you believe is wrong. So we are in a little bit of a different world down here, and this year was interesting seeing some of the evangelicals and their approach to issues, but it is extremely difficult to even have a conversation often. You're having a very different experience, right, Frankel?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine how difficult it must be.
Hard to describe.
In your state. Yeah, as I said, been in the minority and had to deal with some of these issues, but we always had we've had a Democratic governor for 8 years prior to Governor Shapiro, who always was kind of a backstop to much of the craziness, thank God. But in terms of white nationalism, it's been an issue. We had, if any of you were following the gubernatorial campaign of 2022, in Pennsylvania, when Josh Shapiro won, his opponent was an avowed white nationalist who had purchased, I guess, a platform time on the Gab website, which is a virulent anti-Semitic, anti-Black, anti-immigrant website. It's the website that the shooter at Tree of Life had been interacting with, and who was live streaming the morning that he went into Tree of Life and said, "Hell with this, I'm going in." And the candidate Doug Mastriano, basically was working with this website to basically scour them for supporters and money, etc. So he made no bones about it, and it became an issue. We did press conferences around the state calling him out, and I became a target of anti-Semitic posts and so forth on that website in the midst of all of that. But we've tried to, work, subsequently to try and build bridges on an interfaith basis with different communities. And one of the things we did this year, a lot of this is because we're in the majority. We had 2 resolutions, one resolution commemorating Jewish American Heritage Month, and one Muslim American Heritage Month. And those 2 resolutions were introduced by my friend Tariq Khan, who is a Muslim member from Philadelphia. And we did them simultaneously, and I spoke on his resolution and he spoke on mine. And we got some press about it in terms of trying to work among interfaith groups, particularly in this kind of fraught moment, to kind of demonstrate. Now, I would tell you that the resolution for Jewish Heritage Month passed, I think, with 1 negative vote, and there were probably a couple of dozen negative votes on the Muslim resolution, which tells you a little bit of something about where we're at. But we've tried to create that kind of sense of, we're a diverse state, that we want to make sure everybody feels protected, everybody feels honored, and not taking sides. And so while it was just just 2 resolutions, we felt pretty good about the outcome and the reaction of our colleagues, and the publicity that we got around doing that. So yeah, we're all the time trying to work things out. I mean, there's been clearly some tensions that have been developing over a number of years, but maybe heightened now between my African-American colleagues and Jewish members, and we're working together in a caucus of Jewish Black legislators to try and overcome some of these differences, or at least have an opportunity to have a conversation and talk about these things, because we've been allies for so many times, for decades, on civil rights issues and voting issues, that we wanted to make sure that we found a way to reinvigorate that and preserve those really critical alliances that have led to so much progress in our country. So we're working hard to kind of, repair those relationships and have lines of communication so that we don't have these kind of misunderstandings.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And I really love that idea of, you planned out these two resolutions and spoke on each other's, because, we talk about separation of religion and government, church and state, but in lieu of that, it's practicing pluralism and what that actually looks like. And that's a really great example of that. My next question for both of you is about, imagining a world, and it might be easier for you, Representative Frankel, since you're in the majority now, to imagine this. And I'm sure you think about this all the time, Representative Landry. And if you had a magic wand, if we weren't spending so much time and resources fighting bad bills, the things coming out of ALEC and the white Christian nationalist movement, what positive policies that advance separation of church and state, advance inclusiveness, inclusion and pluralism would you like to see?
Well, I mean, clearly the hate crimes legislation, broadening civil rights. I mean, I talked about that to folks. I'm trying to think what other kinds of things, hmm? Yeah. Making sure, in Pennsylvania, we've had great disparities with respect to public education, and we had a court order this year that mandated that we rectify that situation, which was, to actually do that would be $6 or $7 billion in what is about a $45 billion budget for the state. And the governor made this a priority. Our caucus did, and we made a significant down payment on dealing with those disparities by funding public schools, more fairly, and also dealing with some of the challenges that our public schools have with respect to charter schools, charter school funding, which is not exactly transparent here, and specifically cyber charter schools, which have been draining our public schools in our cities in particular, in a way that is not sustainable. So we made, trying to deal with these disparities on the level of education is really important. The other thing that my committee is working on, we passed medical marijuana in the state of Pennsylvania about 6 years ago. I'm working on putting together an adult use bill, and at the forefront of doing adult use cannabis in Pennsylvania will be a criminal justice reform, basically making sure that we not only decriminalize, but give people, the opportunity to pardon folks who are serving time for possession issues, and eliminating criminal records for folks, and then finding a way to target tax revenue that would be generated by adult use cannabis to the communities that had been most severely impacted by the criminal justice system over those decades, where marijuana was illegal and still is, obviously, in many places. And this is really kind of urgent in our state because every state around us, Ohio, believe it or not, just had a referendum to legalize adult use marijuana. So every state around us has a legal adult use market, and we need to do that. And if we're going to do it, we need to do it in a way that reflects, I think, restorative approach, particularly to the communities that had been most severely impacted by the criminalization of cannabis. So that's another area where we're trying to figure out how to fix past injustices and current disparities as well. And I could get into that healthcare as well, which is under my committee in terms of dealing with health disparities that we're working on. We have a very robust group of folks, the Black Maternal Health Caucus, several members of which sit on my committee, that have promoted an agenda to deal with the real crisis in Black maternal health and maternal health generally, in terms of mortality, maternal mortality, infant mortality, and long-term health outcomes. So, there's another area where we're trying to deal with long-time disparities and rectify them, within the context of what our responsibility is as legislators.
Thank you for that. Representative Landry, what you have the magic wand, and now you can introduce and maybe even pass legislation that advances separation of religion and government. And what would it look like?
I had some time to think about this. By the way, every state marijuana issues. I mean, our medical marijuana has somehow become a monopoly now, shocking in Louisiana, and yours truly is trying to help people stop them from getting fired. But if I had a magic wand, I would focus it all on healthcare, because that's, the same people, obviously, we know who are pushing to make abortion unattainable, even if the mother's about to die, are the same people that won't increase funding, that won't increase mental health care funding, that won't increase, even stuff for kids. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. Meanwhile, we have tax money going to crisis pregnancy centers. So if I had control here, I would totally revamp how all of these organizations and groups and advocacy organizations look at healthcare, to see, like, are you really right to life, or you believe in, like the Jewish community has been a strong supporter of reproductive rights for reasons of trusting women and believing in the soul and believing in someone else's judgment and decision. And so trying to get that on, trying to combine those forces with people who they believe they are right to life. They believe that a fetus is a human person. So I need to get them to the next step of, we need to feed and clothe and make sure that that fetus, once born, is going to the doctor, and then his mother is going to the doctor, that everyone, well, I'm not going to say the word vaccine, everyone has their vaccines. And so I would like to expand, if I was in charge and was able to get everyone to listen, I would put it all towards healthcare first, because for a state, it starts with healthcare. If you're too sick to go to work or raise your kids, it's only downhill from there.
Thank you for that. So the last question is about involvement, right? We have all these folks who are part of our network, and the question is, what can constituents and our members who are listening today do to support legislators like you to advance the kind of policies you're talking about and to protect our secular democracy?
You want me to go first? This is a question I've gotten a lot the last couple of years, and I'm bringing it with me to the convention and other places. And this is a larger, I know this is nonpartisan, but especially my party, the United Party conversation is, they've forgotten about state legislatures. Louisiana did not become the way it is overnight. This has been decades, in particular the last decade, that everyone's looking at a president or governor, and those are important races, but your policy comes from state legislatures. What we are seeing, this crisis nationwide, is coming from states where someone can come and buy a state legislator in nowhere, Louisiana or Mississippi, and that person has the same vote as me. They can file the same bills as me. They can do the same things as me, because representative democracy. And I think not just the party, but also national organizations and people who are on this call who are very motivated to know this is a nationwide issue. We need to go and make sure that we have people who are representative of everyone in those states elected, because there's plenty of people who are gay and lesbian, who are, well, poor. We don't have many poor legislators in this state, and they're not represented. And I think that is, I know that sounds very comprehensive, but that's kind of how we got here. And we're not going to get out of it just by filing a few bills here and there. We need to change the makeup of state legislatures, to something that's even a little more bipartisan or close, like Frankel, because that's actually where you get some compromise often. So that is my second wish, that all of us like-minded folks around the country realize that we have to go down to the states and make some changes there. And it's not going to happen in a year or two. It's going to be at least a decade.
Well, you know, I live in a community that, as I said, is not just my district, but the greater community, the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, that's overwhelmingly blue. My district is when you look at the demographics, one of the more most affluent in the state, most highly educated, and very engaged. But trying to explain to folks that it's one thing to come to see Dan Frankel or your state senator, and lobby us on things we already agree, and we have to get beyond because in my district we all live in a kind of a bubble, and I think it's finally coming through that folks need to be engaged beyond their comfort zones. And get out beyond there. So, I completely agree with Mandie trying to explain also to people that, in many ways, state government is much more relevant to what happens in people's day-to-day lives than what takes place at the federal level. And, and it's becoming increasingly so, as, if you take a look at at what the Supreme Court is doing, reproductive rights, unfortunately, is now something that has to be negotiated at the state level. And I think people finally are figuring out how important it is to be engaged at the state level, working and advocating with legislators, and on the electoral side to try and elect people who share the values that I think this community of people we're talking to today have, and that's probably very reflective of what happens in my district. And what's happened in my district is I've gotten an incredible, that message has gotten out, and my activists here, figured out that they've got to get out beyond the 23rd district and work to find and help elect legislators that share that vision. And I think that's one of the reasons we were able to turn the tables in the legislature and get our, narrow razor-thin majority last session. It made all the difference in the world, and we're able to maybe not get all of our agenda passed, but we get a lot of it passed, and at least we raise the visibility of these other issues that will be the platform for moving forward in the future. And I think it's so important to have that level of engagement, both in terms of advocacy on the policy side and working, because, one of the things I tell people is that, I represent 65,000 people. You can get an appointment to see me. You can get me to return a phone call. Maybe you probably can't get that from your congressman or U.S. senator. So you can have this kind of intimate relationship that is a real opportunity to affect somebody's point of view, even if you disagree with them. And sometimes people need to understand that there are different levels of success. Maybe you don't get a legislator to necessarily agree with you on an issue or be for you, but you can sometimes neutralize somebody who might be against you. So there are different ways to measure success, and that kind of engagement is so very important. And I think at least in Pennsylvania, people seem to be getting that message and becoming more effective at being able to work to effectuate their values in public policy and change the hearts and minds of legislators, or at least the political interests and what the stakes are for individuals because I mean, when I look at public opinion in Pennsylvania is overwhelmingly pro-choice. It's overwhelmingly pro gun safety and for LGBTQ rights. It's not, that doesn't get reflected necessarily yet across the board politically, but we've made really significant moves in all those issues, and we've passed bills in the House on all those issues: guns, abortion, LGBTQ rights, and we've sent them over to the Senate, and now people are able to hold this, my colleagues in the state Senate accountable. They have something to say, why aren't you doing this? And I think it gives me hope that it creates the capacity for us to really make some progress in the future in the state of Pennsylvania.
Great. Thank you both so much for sharing your insights and also your magic wand dreams with us, which we hope to see as a reality in the future. So we're going to move on now to questions. So if you haven't yet, please throw your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function. I do see our first question here, which is, why do you think white nationalism has come to the forefront now, and specifically in state legislatures?
I mean, I would tell you that it's those kinds of sentiments have always been there, but they've been kind of contained, and people, many people are embarrassed to maybe hold those positions or don't feel like they can vocalize them or operationalize them. But unfortunately, over the past decade, one president in particular, I think, opened the Pandora's box on all that stuff to give it a level of validity that makes being able to voice those things publicly and vigorously, seem to be legitimate, and people aren't embarrassed about these views anymore because they see it reflected at the highest levels of government. So we have elected officials who basically mirror and say things that you would never have believed people would have said before, so it's really disappointing. I don't pretend to think that those beliefs haven't existed for all time, but they kind of were tamped down. And but now they have reached a level of legitimacy that is really disturbing, and people feel much more entitled to be able to verbalize and act on them.
We cannot hear you, Representative Landry.
Sorry. Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Sorry. We are having some bad weather, which is why the dog. We're having sorry, we're having bad weather, which is why the dog is on my lap. Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay. Sorry, I was saying we are having some bad weather, which is why the dog is on my lap. Just saying, as a Southerner, I see everything through a racial lens because that is what our politics is here. And like Dan said, it's not just that it's even always been here. This is always what it used. This has just become more prevalent. When I first started getting involved in reproductive rights and abortion issues, I saw something that I saw when I was younger, is that I had a lot of friends' parents who said that they were Republicans because of the babies. That was the only issue they gave over and over. Oh, it was abortion, abortion, abortion. And at some point I realized, I'm like, you just want to be a Republican because this is the party of all conservative white people. And so some of these people, I do believe, have very strong religious beliefs. I believe the Speaker of the House does, but there are so many of these politicians out there in the South and elsewhere that this is just an easy thing to use, like I said, and it's just become a lot more, unfortunately, I wouldn't say allowed, but less pushback, maybe, if you want. And it's just always been that down here, and it's been since the civil rights movement. And one of my longtime advocates kind of explained to me, that I just cut out a second. I just cut out again. I'm sorry.
That's
want to
okay.
move on to Dan since I'm cutting you. Yeah.
Well, if you want to
move on
finish
to
that thought,
family.
you were very good for it. It was just a blip.
Yeah.
If you want back just one.
Sorry. I think one of my long-term advocates explained, and you can kind of see it in history, that once desegregation happened, that was happening. There wasn't really what was going on in the country then to switch it. And that's when you started seeing a lot of the religious groups switch to being anti-abortion. I mean, Ronald Reagan passed a pro-choice bill in California. The Baptist conventions, or I get them all confused, passed resolutions basically in support of abortion to a certain degree, generally the first couple trimesters. And then you started seeing it in the 70s and 80s becoming a more religious issue, because there wasn't an issue after busing and desegregation happened, and that this is what became the far right racial issue, was reproductive rights. And now it's become all of these issues. Now it's become gay rights and all of the issues. And LGBT rights has been the most surprising because of how prevalent our gay friends and family members are in society, and how public it is, and how people are welcomed everywhere. And that has been really surprising, the backslide on that to me.
I'm really glad you brought up the racial lens, because there's a reason we say white Christian nationalism, is because those things are
Right.
intertwined. And what you were just referencing is a little known fact about the kind of modern white Christian nationalist movement, is that it was desegregation. It was the threat of places like these Christian universities that had racist policies losing their tax exempt status, and using religious liberty arguments to justify them. But they did recognize at the time that they weren't going to win on the racial issue, that they couldn't say that part out loud. So abortion was a more strategic way to coalesce. So if folks, if you weren't aware, it's the segregation academies and race that really started it all, before abortion became that issue.
I would just add one thing to this in terms of what's changed, because I think you have to take a look at redistricting as an issue here. Because when I first came into the legislature, I was in the minority. I was elected in 1998, but I had pro-choice Republicans that I worked with, pro-LGBT Republicans that I worked with. I had Governor Tom Ridge, who was a Republican, became the first Secretary of Homeland Security, who was pro-choice, pro-LGBT. I mean, he was conservative on some other issues, but you were able to have dialogues with folks and create different types of coalitions to get some things done, because people, particularly and people say curse on both your houses. I really don't believe that that's, entirely the case. I would just see it so much more in my Republican colleagues. But today it's, so many of them just would not put up with what they were seeing, didn't want to run in a primary against a right-wing, candidate, didn't want to have that, and left. And so I think it's radicalized on the right much more than the impact has been on Democrats and on the left in terms of being able to get things done. So I think that is another issue that has created this environment.
Here is another question from Marcy, who's asking about the relationship between white Christian nationalism and climate change. And it was asking if there's any progress to convince them that this is a real and serious issue. As we know, there's a lot of climate change denial among that movement. Seeing you shake your head, Representative Landry.
I can tell you all about what the reasons are for all of this. I mean, they don't like electric vehicles. There's people who vote against solar panels. I can't quite understand a lot of this stuff going on. Y'all need to come watch Baton Rouge sometimes. It's all part and parcel of the same sort of worldview. And a lot of it, I think the people in charge are just pranking them, just trying to see what they can get them to go along with. And yeah, I know we're about to end, but this goes back to what I said earlier about state legislatures. Just think about it. You go drop 30, 40, 50 grand in a little state legislative race that nobody saw you coming. Now you have more people who are going to file your crazy extremist bills or new bills, and they're not going to pass the first year because people think they're weird. They're going to go 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Speaker of the U.S. House, Mike Johnson, had a whole career doing that in the Louisiana legislature with moral bills and reproductive bills. And they start, and after 5 years, it seems like not a big deal. And then they're just pushing this, they're pushing. And they do that to get them all the way through, because then they go to lawsuits. And then they feed to the Supreme Court eventually, because they have 50 games going on. So yeah, go look up Speaker Mike Johnson. He has quite a history. The man has only ever had one competitive race, I think, ever.
Yeah, I'd also say something that both Representative Landry and I probably share is that we're big oil and gas states, and
Yeah.
particularly here in Western Pennsylvania. So, dealing with those interests in that money that is in our political system is really very challenging to deal with. And, Pennsylvania, I think now probably exceeds Louisiana and only second to Texas in terms of being a natural gas producer with the Marcellus Shale, and it has really polarized our politics around the issue of climate change and climate denial, and it makes those issues particularly very difficult to deal with here.
There's a question specifically for you, Representative Frankel, to elaborate. I think we might have just enough time to get into this. Can you explain a little bit more about the impact of redistricting? You were mentioning earlier that I think you were saying it had an impact on kind of the extremism of primaries.
Right. Because in too many districts, primaries are the only election. So, I live in one of the bluest districts. I mean, you couldn't make my district competitive. So theoretically, I'm going to have the only problem. I never get a primary, but would be theoretically a primary. And I would say that the number of competitive districts in the state of Pennsylvania is, probably 15%, and everybody else is just worried about their primary. And
you're saying that's due to redistricting.
So you have really conservative members who get primaried by more conservative members, and this happens more in the Republican side of the aisle than on the Democratic side of the aisle, for sure. And I'm, the former Speaker of the House, who's now the minority leader, Brian Cutler, one of the most conservative members of the House, gets primaried and literally almost taken out by somebody further to his right. And it makes it very difficult, particularly when he was Speaker and, helping to set the agenda and shutting down Democrats whenever we got to the floor. It became, very difficult. But I think that's really part of the problem. And, Democrats and Republicans have different feelings about the whole redistricting issue and how to make, whether to make it nonpartisan or not. We were able to get a very good map for which we believe is a fair map for Pennsylvania. It's the reason we were able to get into the majority by one seat. But none of those races that put us in the majority were slam dunks. They were all really competitive races, and I think that's healthy for democracy. It's healthy for a more moderate climate to be able to get things done. I think that's one of the things we need to take a look at. Even as Democrats, it might make some of us more uncomfortable, but it's probably better for the polity that we go down a line where we have a fair way to determine every 10 years how our districts, both at the state legislative level and at the congressional level, are drawn. And so, courts have interjected themselves into this in many cases too, to overturn some of these partisan maps.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are just at time, so perfect timing on that question. Thank you so much to both of you. We really appreciate all the work that you do, whether it's, for many, many years being in the minority and now in a different position, versus being in a very deeply conservative and religious state. We really see you. We appreciate you. And hopefully for the folks who tuned in, you learned a little bit more about the day-to-day, how important it is to be engaged in state politics with your state legislators. Please stay tuned for our next webinars. We're going to continue to have these conversations about white Christian nationalism and ways to get involved. So thank you, Representative Frankel. Thank you, Representative Landry, for joining us today. Thank you for everyone who joined, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, Mandie. I'll see you in Chicago.